Welcome, everyone. Wow, it's loud. It's wonderful having you all here today. We're very excited. And also a quick thank you to all of our sponsors for making this happen. Seize the day. It is an opportunity this industry has before us. We can change how the world views us. We do it better than most. We deliver results. And we have strength in many sectors, from biosciences to digital health. But we need political, business, and research institution leaders to come together and believe in a vision that we can be a leader in healthcare solutions. Other states that are similar to Wisconsin are moving aggressively and uniting behind this. Washington, Pennsylvania, Colorado. We need to organize and take action in a market that Wisconsin can be a leader. So what does that market look like? And that was what it was supposed to look like if I would keep moving the slides. We start the day with Mark Freitas describing the healthcare disruption and the forces that are reshaping healthcare. Those disruptors are happening in Wisconsin, and we have a great lineup with our showcase companies. But a report came out a couple weeks ago that we have a migration issue. People stay here, but we are 45th in attracting people to our state. We are an aging state. We have a great breakout session on retaining and attracting talent. Our second breakout session is our investment panel. That isn't your typical panel of only looking at VC funding, which we tend to concentrate on and only focus on in this state, but alternative approaches to fund our emerging growth biohealth companies. That leads us to celebrating Wisconsin achievements. These awardees are not just part of the past, they are the foundation for our future. And that future can contain a biomanufacturing center of excellence, for Wisconsin being seen as a hub for biomanufacturing. Academic and research institutions are collaborating right now and partnering with industry. They're transforming our manufacturing to biomanufacturing, biomedical manufacturing, like Philips Medisize will describe. But why turn in this direction? Why should this state be focused on healthcare solutions? This will be a fascinating panel. Discussion between Fujifilm, Cisco, and IBM Watson Health on how healthcare is redefining their companies. And then we bring in a pharma perspective. It weaves back to our keynote presentation that we are moving to centering on the patient, the individual, and how drug development and how that affects drug development to regulatory strategy. And finally, a disease that has impacted us all in some way. The Cancer Moonshot panel will inspire us on the work they are doing, the progress being made to prevent cancer and detect it at an early stage, how the focus on the individual is driving more effective treatments. And there's no better way to end this summit than to hear a moving story from a cancer survivor. So we can be a splintered state, we can be in our individual boxes, but we won't accomplish much. We won't attract talent to this state. Or we can unite together, change the statistics, focus on an industry that can redefine Wisconsin's future. We have all the pieces.
There's something happening. A movement is underway. It's changing the world of healthcare and the lives of people every day. This movement is gaining momentum right here in the state of Wisconsin, where we have a rich history of transforming ideas into real products and solutions. Now we're building on that legacy of ingenuity to pioneer a new industry. integrated health solutions. Imagine a world where everyone is a part of a health system with the most advanced therapies and medical technology that flows seamlessly into their daily lives and routines through mobile apps, electronic medical records, personalized care, and more. All thanks to disruptive technologies and industry convergence. Biotech and biopharma are teaming up with digital health to reduce costs, improve outcomes, and provide better experiences to doctors, patients, and their families. Medical device companies are working with innovative pharmaceutical firms to deliver drugs in the most effective way possible. Manufacturers are partnering with research and biohealth companies to provide everything from packaging to multi-million-dollar instrument platforms. And the constant drive of digital development makes each step of the process smarter and more tailored to the needs of every individual. We have all the pieces in Wisconsin to make this happen. Look around you. We have all the pieces in this room. Now let's put them together and build the future. Together.
I'm sorry, we need to start marketing this industry. And by God, BioForward's going to be out in front here doing it. So I am going to say it right now. I was going to say it at launch. That is by SRH Marketing in Milwaukee. They are an outstanding firm and incredibly creative gentlemen that we're very excited to work with to advance our industry. So now, we got to keep the show rolling. We got a lot going on today, and I'm really excited about this program and the lead-off hitter. Mark Freitas is our keynote speaker. We do have all the pieces when we come together. And as our keynote speaker is going to inform us, there are major forces converging to transform healthcare. We must move quickly, support our disruptors, our innovators, and be aligned or be left behind. I am extremely excited to hear Mark Freitas present on this book, Healthcare Disrupted: Next Generation Business Models and Strategies. Mark is the Managing Director of Competitive Center of Excellence for Accenture Strategy. Please welcome Mark Freitas.
Thank you. So I just want to thank everyone for having me, and Lisa as well for inviting me here. I think it's an exciting topic. When we think about what's going on with the healthcare industry and how we want to talk about the evolution of that and what that means not only for patients but also for people participating in the industry. So just the clicker. The one thing I forgot was to grab the clicker from Lisa to move this forward, but essentially there's, let me just grab this real quick. Okay. So they say. Very good. So what's going on with this change? We see a lot of things happening just in environment, particularly around healthcare and digitization, and the technology is kind of evolving at a very rapid pace. We see people having access to information. Certainly cell phones have actually done a great job in standardizing platforms to share that information. And we're learning a lot just about the world, about people, and about communicating with one another. What that's doing is actually changing in terms of the healthcare situation, this kind of consumerization and expectation about how to interact as a patient with the healthcare system, and how that kind of evolve into what do I need to get treated better, where do people go to find information, and how do they interact with the system. And that information is actually enabling people to make better choices, to live longer lives, and that's resulting in some of the market situations we see where people are living longer, populations are growing, and how you manage and treat different diseases are shifting and changing and evolving for the better. But that kind of creates this burden from an economic standpoint where governments and health authorities are taking a big role in funding some of the treatments of those diseases, and we see that kind of transgressing into a situation where it's just unsustainable to treat those diseases. And as we learn more about those treatments, we find that they're actually not as effective as they should be or that we would like them to be, and that kind of gets to this equation around what is value and how do you move to outcomes. So we see this trend kind of taking place, particularly in the US, what we're happening here is that the amount of money being spent to fund healthcare is at a breaking point, right? And so we have the Affordable Care Act, but regardless of what the act happens, or even with the election coming, this kind of movement is kind of happening no matter what. We can't pay for service, and we have to kind of really focus on what are we getting as the outcome. So we see that there's certainly with the ACOs and some legislation coming out, and the FDA recently announcing how we're going to bring patient data and EMR data as part of the registration process. We see CMS saying that they want to move to 50% of value-based reimbursement by 2018. Like, these types of trends are happening, and more importantly, we see that it's not just a US trend, right? It's happening around the globe. There's some stuff happening in Wales, what's happening in Stockholm City Council, the way they're looking at how they want to evolve healthcare. And you start taking countries like Estonia or Finland and what they're doing in terms of understanding and gathering as much data on their populations as possible to try to move and treat populations to a different outcome. And so what we did to try to get a better handle on this is we went around and we interviewed the CEOs of the top 40 healthcare institutions in the United States to ask them a very particular question around how do you see the healthcare environment kind of evolving over time, and what are the biggest hurdles that you have to kind of stay ahead of that change. And when we did that, it was a pretty interesting exercise, but we broke it into these buckets of looking at the structure, looking at the consumer, and we'll get to why we say consumer, not patient, in a second, the economics and the market. And I won't jump through each of these little tiles and kind of focus on a couple for each one, but at the structure level, what we had heard was that it's really important to recognize that when the burden and the risk of paying for the healthcare system is going to be shifting, that shift is going to mean that a lot of health systems just aren't going to be able to take on that risk. So consolidation is going to have to happen. And the expectation is that within each major market, 1 to 2 health systems will survive. What that means is there's about 100 systems total in the US going forward. So you can kind of imagine what that means and how quickly that'll happen, but there's a lot of tumultuous environments going on in the industry, a lot of consolidation. We already see major health systems trying to get extended plays and reaching out into communities and expanding their coverage and having different partnerships. And there's an alliance between MD Anderson and Scripps, for example, and having MD Anderson go from Houston to San Diego, right? Like, it's just a broad play of these types of large institutions making and moving into an environment where that consolidation is happening, and it's going to enable them to drive care in a different way. I think from the consumer thing, one of the interesting things that we heard is to say, consumer kept coming up, and we asked them, don't you mean patient? And the answer is no. You got it completely wrong. It's a consumer, right? We have to move them not from treating them as a patient, but getting them to kind of think more about a preventative perspective, as well as looking beyond the direct patient to their health, kind of lifestyle and caregivers, whether it's parents or siblings or, what have you, that all of those are consuming some resources from the healthcare system and finding ways to interact with those people and thinking of them both either whether it's preventative or kind of in a caregiver environment or as a direct patient as a means of thinking about how we're going to deliver healthcare going forward. And so two things. What we see is that kind of continued movement upstream, right? You're thinking about not just the patient, but the consumer. How to get them to make better choices before they get sick. How to help them kind of navigate a complex environment and stay abreast of new information as it becomes available. And thinking yourself as kind of a partner with those consumers. And then really organizing not around the physician, but around the patient. And I mean that, and we hear that patient-centric, and that comes up quite a bit, but this means that the system is actually structured in a way that supports the patient as opposed to physician. So you can see things like, there's certainly technological challenges to making that happen, but giving data, the data is not the healthcare systems, it's the patients, right? And the patient's going to be the arbiter of more information than anybody else, and they're going to decide what to share with you and how to share it. And that's just a completely different paradigm shift, and trying to create an environment and an ecosystem where a patient would want to share with you in that type of environment, it's a different model than what exists today. One of the other things just around the economics, we talked a little bit about how the government funding is driving a lot of these challenges and trying to make sure they can come up with a way that's sustainable going forward. We see that increasing, certainly as the population ages in the US, there's going to be a greater role with Medicare and Medicaid, but they're actually moving to how to manage populations as a whole and how to think about that in a novel way. So there's a lot of efforts going on to gather data and understand larger patient populations. But if you think about how each health system gathers information and works on it, like none of them have enough data to actually drive that meaningfully on a population level. So they need to be collaborative, they need to come up with new models to get access to greater information. And what we see, for example, is how are they partnering with payers? How are they partnering with the government? How are they partnering with each other? How are they partnering with patients? Right? So there's just the economics of how to get funding is going to be about moving populations to an outcome. And how to do that is going to require a very different mechanism because it's not all about just the treatment they get, but it's about the drugs you provide or the services you provide or the partnerships you have and the information you have to kind of adjust care over time. So that's something, again, that's evolving the economics of that. And then, with respect to the market, this kind of aspect of genomics will guide care. I mean, I think it's a little bit broader than that in terms of what we're seeing, but certainly the omics and how to use that detailed information to have more targeted therapeutics to kind of get to that aspect of a personalized approach to better understand the mechanism of action with what's going on with the complex system and the biology of what's happening in the human body. Every person is individual and unique, and it's very complex, and it's very challenging to kind of navigate that. But as we kind of understand and appreciate that a little bit more, that's actually going to change how care is delivered. And then the other piece to that, and we've seen a lot, particularly with the government kind of driving a lot of this too, is saying, hey, to make this work and to make everything kind of come together and share information and actually move the industry, these systems have to work together, right? So we've seen some things recently, here taking a local company with Epic, right? Like Epic having to kind of open up, their code and share that with the government and try to kind of create a system where you can be more interoperable, right? And trying to find a way that organizations can navigate the data more meaningfully, have access to greater data. Making that work and plugging into that ecosystem is going to be very critical for any success going forward. So, that's the view of the healthcare CEOs, right, in the US. And so you can take it, with a grain of salt of, hey, it's someone that's got a perspective, but it doesn't necessarily capture what everyone's perspective is. Regardless of that, though, there's a number of things happening that we can say, without a doubt, this is a trend that's going, it's moving, it's irreversible. It'll take some time, and I know there's been some comments we've had in the industry around, we've talked about value-based systems for years, and it's never happened. And it's not going to happen overnight, right? But it is happening and it is moving, and the faster you can get out in front of that and help solve some of these problems, the more of a competitive advantage you'll have in the marketplace. So what this is meant to show here is just how that evolution will take place over time, how we think it'll unfold. It may happen quicker than 20 years, but for purposes of where we're at in that evolution, I think we're still in the early phases of it, and we're progressing, and we can progress rapidly with a lot of innovation and a lot of collaboration in the space. So what that translates into is how do you drive value? What does that mean for the industry? And historically, it's been a lot about clinical effectiveness, the novelty and scientific data, and certainly the regulatory pathways to make that happen. And what we're seeing now is it actually is shifting more to this kind of value equation. So it's not just about medical evidence, but that's changing, right? It's, like I mentioned earlier, having EMR data along with clinical trial data and confederating that to kind of build out your value story and show your medical evidence is a new value driver. Thinking about system value, right? And we're talking about moving things to a population. It's not just, with targeted therapies, one of the constructs of that is you have smaller patient populations, right? So you focusing on a small patient population may not be having the influence across the larger patient population of, say, a state or a country. And so how do you fit within that, and understanding the novelty of that to enhance your value beyond that is important. And then it kind of gets to the other part of analytical insights and actions, like being able to be nimble and flexible, continuously improve and evolve what your offerings are and what your products or services may be, is going to be critical to staying abreast, because new competition's coming, new value equations are happening, and what outcomes are and what is a successful outcome is going to continuously be redefined and evolve over time. So when you look at it from a pharmaceutical lens, but this applies for med device as well, what we see kind of driving that change and the speed that that change will happen is really going to come from what we call patient services. So here, just looking at this example, it's focusing on the patient, wrapping these services around the patient, and creating that ecosystem that really can help move the patient forward. So if you're a pharma company or a med device company, it's not just about the clinical effectiveness of your drug, but how are you partnering with physicians? How are you partnering with the healthcare system? What's the situation you have with the government around reimbursement and coverage? And how you're working with payers as well, right? And navigating that holistically to service the patients is going to be the key to success. And if those who can figure out the services construct faster can redefine and disrupt the market quicker. And so an example of how that would unfold in some aspects of that, so this is not meant to be all-inclusive, but it just tries to show that this is really coming through in a lot of ways. I mean, we talk about wearables and connected devices and remote monitoring and what that means. Right now the data is still kind of catchy, and it's not as clean as it can be in some cases, but that's evolving and that's improving over time. Persistent connectivity, and is another aspect of that, where it's really kind of driving both from a supply chain perspective and how you're moving product about, from a continuous manufacturing perspective, in terms of having that real-time data and information, and then even in terms of connecting with the physician and the other caregivers, if you have like a care team, as well as the patients. Like that's something that's going to have this like real-time access to information and always be connected with the population that you're treating, and understanding and moving the needle effectively within that to iterate treatment over time. And there's other things here too, but we kind of get into some things around what pervasive sensors, and we'll talk a little bit around that too, but adherence is a common problem, and we're seeing some interesting plays around technology that can be ingested to track adherence and help report out. There's actually even one that's almost like a talk screen on the go, right? And it can communicate to your iPad and also go out to your physicians. I think the key thing to keep in mind here is, well, everyone can provide a service and everyone can do something that's really interesting. One of the messages that we're hearing, particularly from physicians and health systems, is it's too much. It's already too much, right? Because everyone has their own solution, and it doesn't actually work in the workflow of the physician, right? And so trying to make sure that it's not, hey, I have an answer, here you go, but how do I plug this into your environment and make it work for you? And that's, again, the systems value, and understanding that you can't solve it alone. And a physician isn't going to go into 7 different systems to keep checking on data and working out details and accessing information. It's just too cumbersome and too difficult. So trying to find a way to make that easier and more seamless to help drive patient care is going to be critical to how these services will come together. So examples of like what this means and some kind of constructs, and one of the things that I mentioned earlier today was, you can think about what's effective, right? You don't have to be a drug company to drive medical benefit or clinical benefit, right? So here's the WellPoint's Blue Star app, or WellDoc, excuse me, Blue Star app, and it's actually able to demonstrate an A1C reduction in patients, right? Absent the drug that it was companion to the treatment. And that's like a meaningful difference, right? In terms of the sense that it's driving clinical value, it's helping patients, it's certainly a device, but it's separate and apart from the drug. And we see some other examples here where Freitas is that ingestible sensor, right? And what it's able to do in terms of not only tracking adherence, it actually has some pretty cool predictive analytics, and it can help kind of challenge patients to be more prescriptive in how they care for themselves and what they do. And so for the heart failure patients, it was actually having a huge improvement on systolic blood pressure over the baseline, right? So 85% had a reduction compared to 33% in the control group. And so we see these things kind of really moving what care means and complementing the medical effectiveness of drugs, right? And so some other examples are Noom. This just came out a couple weeks ago. How its kind of coaching app is able to help people lose weight, and particularly diabetic patients, but the ability to drive the weight loss by itself, is kind of an interesting novel approach where you have weight loss drugs trying to do the same thing. Now if you're a drug manufacturer, your competition is software and technology too, right? So you're trying to kind of be a little bit bigger than that, but it's not just about that, right? So here's an example. I don't know how many are familiar with United and Qualcomm's partnership, but what they do is they get people to participate in these types of programs, and it works just like the insurance plug. You plug into your card and it measures your driving, and it gives you a reduction on your premiums. This is the same thing. You wear an activity tracker. It's going to monitor your activity. You have to log in and participate, but if you hit the certain thresholds, you'll get a reimbursement or reduction on your premiums going forward. So again, trying to think of how to drive care, how to change care, not really a patient in this example, right? More of a consumer, but moving them to keep them healthy and keep them kind of on that preventative track. So what this means is that what the answer is in life sciences isn't that it's about being a product and having a fun and interesting and medically valid and effective product, but it is more about having a service, right? We see this kind of evolution happening, and as we can move up to living services, that evolution means your services founded entity, which the products support that service. It's not that you get rid of products, but the products alone won't work. So an example of this is Novartis. So they had an Entresto launch. The drug came to market, phenomenal clinical evidence, had a strong case, and they couldn't get reimbursement. So they get approval, but they couldn't get reimbursement, right? And so that really struggled because they couldn't make the value equation. The price was too high and didn't really demonstrate enough of a value. And so they have to now go back and undergo the most expensive phase 4 study in history to try to kind of move the needle and help support their equation, because they weren't as expansive around the value and the outcomes and what that meant. Instead, they were just relying just on the product itself, right? So how can they wrap that around and think more differently about what it means to go to market with a clinically effective product? And so what they're doing is thinking, all right, I have to be a little bit more, we're probably more on the enhanced product integrated services spectrum, but other companies are kind of advancing faster to living services, and it's an evolution. It'll take some time, but it seems that the market is definitely moving in that direction. So what that means is that thinking about a holistic solution and how to drive kind of care, you hear a lot about patient centricity, patient value. What is value? And it's like, it's quality plus oh my God, I'm totally blanking right now, right? But quality divided by cost, right? So it's when you think about here, one of the things that we wanted to kind of emphasize is that it's more than that, right? It's more holistic than that. And you have to think about what are ways that you can really drive value and add to an ecosystem. So example, providing access. How do you enable somebody to not only reduce the cost and have more access from a financial perspective, but how do you help them understand and navigate the choices they have in their treatment, right? How do you help them actually physically get to an appointment or to get access to a doctor? You could have kind of a teledoc or telehealth or some type of connected health platform. It doesn't always have to be physically there, but you could, participate in Uber. We see Uber Health now bringing folks to medical appointments, and that's part of the program that they have together, right? We see some folks like TaskRabbit actually going and picking up prescriptions and delivering it to patients who have mobility issues. So, and you can think even further, about nutrition and wellness and kind of what is this landscape of kind of this healthcare ecosystem. There's a company called Mobily Robotics, and they're developing this kind of robotic kitchen, right? And it actually works like iTunes. You download a recipe, the robot like then makes the recipe and provides food for someone. Well, if you're an elderly person who can't lift pots and pans and cook well, this is an opportunity for you to eat healthier. You can actually create a whole ecosystem around delivering fresh food that will have a meal plan. It's a much more inclusive environment for that meal plan. So providing access can be a lot of different things. So it's not just about reducing costs. I think the same thing with personalizing care. It's about really understanding not just the genomics idea of what personalized care means, but really understanding what is it going to take for your patient, or in some cases the consumer, to actually move the needle. In some cases it is a medical genetic thing that you can say, okay, I understand what the response will be with these treatments, and I can target a therapy appropriate for that. And that counts. That's definitely part of it too. But part of it is for patients of a certain disease state or a certain age or a certain condition, I may have to change how I deliver care. And being able to change that and personalize it in a more meaningful way, like we saw with the new map, and making it about the person, about the individual, are ways to get people more engaged and more tailored to kind of something that will work for them. So that's an avenue to try to build value. Demonstrating value from a financial perspective is absolutely important too. I don't want to diminish that, but it is about understanding and defining that health comes together, right? It's not always as straight-laced as saying, oh, I'm going to have this reduction, or I'm going to have extend life this long. In some cases, what is a good and successful outcome is a little bit harder to define. And what's the value of an additional 6 weeks or a healthy, sustainable life? Or if you think about what's the value of getting a stroke patient back and rehabilitated quicker to be a productive member of society faster. Well, that's a hard equation to kind of define, but that's what health authorities want you to be able to show. So how do you kind of go through that and show those values, and thinking about your value story in a more collected and holistic way is a very important aspect of moving and succeeding going forward. The transparency piece is one that's often overlooked. I mean, we hear some things around creating access to data, and patients will have their own data, and it's absolutely inclusive of all those things. But a good example for me is, so my son recently needed an MRI, and he's fine, everything's all well and good, right? But just for safety's sake, and I was like, well, I gotta pay for that myself, so what's the cost gonna be? I couldn't get an answer. So then I tried calling around to figure out, well, help me understand, here's the particular type of MRI, what machine do you have, what's the cost going to be, and I'm an informed consumer trying to make a real choice, and I'm willing to travel to different locations to get that done, and I could not get an easy, or in some cases definitive answer from anyone, so that I couldn't choose how I wanted to move my care for my son, right? So I ended up just going with the place that was in the building where the doctor was, for the sake of the ease of getting the medical records and sharing the information. And it was a lot of money. And had I gone somewhere else, maybe I could have saved a lot of money. And another example is just, I went, this is earlier in the year, so I have 4 kids. I got a lot of stories about my children, but I bore you all with that. But we took them all in for a flu shot, and supremely cheap in many ways. So I'm like, I'm not going for the primary care physician. The pediatrician's going to try to get me doing a lot of things, and I'm just going to go to the Minute Clinic. And so I go to the Minute Clinic and take them in, and my daughter ended up having a fever. And they're like, oh, she has a fever, so I can give it a flu shot. I'm like, okay. Well, then I get a bill for $84. And I'm like, for taking her temperature, right? But had she not had a fever, you would have done more services and I wouldn't have to pay anything, right? So it was just kind of another example of the transparency just isn't quite there. I don't know what I'm buying when I'm going in. I don't have a clear view of how much it's going to cost me. And there's a lot of complexity just in the number of health plans out there and who has different rates and how that works. And and all that is well and good. But if you think about it from the patient's perspective or as a consumer, the transparency to know, hey, I want to know what it's going to cost me, and I want to be able to get those services quickly, are 2 things that are really struggling for the healthcare industry today. And the faster you can solve some of those equations, the better you will in trying to provide value. And then the last piece is build engagement. And this is about similar to the MRI story or type of test results story that everyone has, it takes sometimes a really long time to get information back, and sometimes you get information, it doesn't even come back. My wife had a test, just to test the iron levels in her blood, and it came back fine, so the doctor felt, I didn't call, I didn't have any needs, so she had to chase it down to find out what was going on, and actually found it on the lab test on the website. And she's like, it was interesting that it took her 3 weeks to get those results back. And that's just a frustrating expectation of, if you want to engage and excite somebody in participating, and you think of it as a consumer who has choices, really kind of solving those equations and those challenges is going to be a big part of what success is going forward. And you think about today, it certainly has a lot of history with Uber and, in different geographies and what that means, but the ability to have that on-demand service is something that is kind of changing the expectations of consumers. And it's not just Uber, right? You have Netflix, you have Airbnb even in terms of how they manage properties, and even Amazon with their sometimes same-day delivery of things. It's just kind of changing the expectations of consumers. So when you start thinking of consumers in healthcare, well, they have those same expectations. So waiting for things is almost unacceptable nowadays. Now, obviously, some things just require more time, but the more you can reduce that time and give that kind of exciting, rewarding, and informative relationship to a patient as fast as you can, the more you're going to build that engagement in your platform and in your solution. So when you think about what does it mean to define a service, or even what does it mean to provide value, it's important to be broader than just looking at the cost and quality equation. So what we did when I say we, so I mean the firm did a number of interviews and surveys and detailed research over a 2.5-year period of time. It was really involved. It resulted in the book that was on the cover of the part of this presentation. So there's certainly a lot more detailed information in that book, but essentially what it talks about is kind of this whole evolution across many different perspectives and spectrums. But the culmination of all of that research and what the genesis of this thinking is, there's 4 models that are evolving. And within those models that we see within the healthcare and life science market, how you can kind of figure out a way that will be successful for you, and how you can define a competitive advantage within that. So I'll go through the models real quickly and kind of explain what they are and give some examples. But the construct here is that there's really not just one answer for anyone, and you can be in multiple models simultaneously. But you're ultimately going to have to make a decision to define value and be successful going forward. Right? So the Lean Innovators, kind of at the start, is really thinking about what the generics companies used to be. Now, generics as a concept, I wouldn't say going away, but it is largely gone in the sense that generics companies aren't really just generics companies anymore. They have a lot of innovative therapies, and they're just competing on the same level as other pharma companies are. What the challenge there, though, is that they've actually perfected their operational efficiencies and can run a very smooth and lean operation. So as they're bringing new products to market and bringing those innovative therapies to market, they have some efficiencies already kind of built into their system that allow them to do some pretty novel things, whether it's some pricing arbitrage and thinking of ways to kind of expand margin, or it's thinking of how to more effectively kind of manufacture a product and drive the supply chain to an efficient solution to reduce that time. So it works in certain areas, and it's an effective model in terms of focusing on the cost equation, right? There's value in being able to develop therapies at a cheaper cost and being able to provide them at a cheaper rate. That's definitely going to be true in certain therapeutic areas, but not all, right? So the other thing that we're seeing is around the patient innovators. And what these are typically are your traditional pharmaceutical companies who are thinking about, I need to kind of focus on the patient, and I want to have a good understanding of their journey and what they're going through, and kind of provide a therapy based off of not just the medical background of the patient, but just really the kind of taking out some of the hassles in that journey and providing kind of that experience. The value innovators, though, are slightly different, right? And this is a little bit more, I won't say evolved, but certainly more advanced in their thinking around what value is, right? And this is trying to think of outcomes specifically and trying to move to an outcomes, right? So rather than just, I want to help you and provide more services, this is like, I'm actually going to the extreme and trying to define and build my business around being able to deliver an outcome. We see this mostly in medical device companies who are able to actually, do outcomes-based reimbursement and price based on outcomes exclusively. For example, if you have a heart failure patient, you'll pay X thousands of dollars, and I will treat that patient for 1 year, and I'll guarantee this particular outcome. And that's a more advanced way to kind of move the market. It requires a lot of information and a lot of detail. You got to really know your patients. You got to know how treatments are designed. And ultimately, when you shift to that model, and we can get into a little bit more details later, but when you shift to that model, you really have to have a say in how care is delivered, right? And you have to think about that, because a lot of the outcomes are going to be driven by what we call care gaps, and closing those care gaps is going to be a biggest impact on outcomes more than anything else. So how do you share information? How do you work with physicians and healthcare systems and even payers to kind of drive and move the patient population significantly enough that you can actually take on all the risk for your particular patient population? So that would be what we call the value innovator. And then the new health digital is certainly open to any new and interesting names for this group, but what we call them are folks that are, there's kind of two constructs that are entering the space. They're either health companies that are relying on digital technologies to kind of drive value, or digital companies or technology companies who are kind of entering the health space through like a new market and new ways of thinking. So it is thinking of like a new kind of disruption or evolution of the healthcare system by basing it on technology in some aspect, right? As opposed to driving the information on populations or thinking about services. This is really just focusing on technology. So the Noom, the Blue Star app, the Proteus group, like those are all kind of part of the new health digital place. So this isn't something that is just going to impact patients or even impact you guys, but it is something that you think about how they would relate with payers and how they're going to relate with distributors, and it's going to disrupt the whole market. So as you understand your position and where you're going to extract value, what your operating model would be focused on, that's your competitive strength, right? So to get an advantage around that strength, you have to have an ecosystem that accentuates that advantage, right? So how do you partner with those to continue to get that advantage throughout that ecosystem is going to be a key challenge. So at the end of the day, what I'm saying is, you got to understand your market positioning, so it's kind of where you're going, how you're driving value. You want to be able to differentiate your capabilities and understand what they are, right? Because that's going to be how you are able to kind of extract your share of voice in the market and your value from a financial perspective in the market. And then you really want to be focused on this high performance enterprise. So no one can do this alone, and that's probably the biggest message that I can give you guys here today, is that it's all about collaboration and partnership. And again, if you think of the ecosystem as a construct, how you do that and how you work in that ecosystem and what your value is to the larger whole is really what's going to drive your success going forward. So understanding and appreciating and building your organization to support that type of environment is going to be critical. So just kind of dive in a little bit more on each of the business models for a little bit. So here, if you think about, hey, what is the market position, the differentiating capabilities, and how do we kind of get this high-performing enterprise? For the Lean Innovator, we talked a little bit about competitive pricing and being able to drive the efficiencies and reduce the cost of their business to have a better margin play, where they can really kind of focus, again, their competitive differentiation is going to be focused on those aspects where, how you think about large populations or directly working with, payers and healthcare systems distributors, getting the volume you need where that efficiency makes sense is going to be a key position play for them. And so that allows them to really focus on their differentiating capabilities. So optimizing product portfolios is one aspect of it, right? Continuously improving and refining and embedding those strengths into all aspects of their product development process. But there's, think about the global manufacturing networks, or you think about how they are able to, at scale, like absorb acquisitions and run mergers. Like they can selectively pick places that they want to play and make those acquisitions to support their kind of strengths that they want, and to continue to build and enhance those strengths to differentiate themselves even further. And then for the performance piece, it's something that over time these companies have grown by acquisition. They certainly have a broad talent mix that they're able to kind of bring to the table, and they are able to kind of really drive out costs in a very effective way. So for them, what they're going to continuously to be monitored on by both the street if they're public or just their own internal investors is really kind of that margin expansion and how to keep driving that improvement. So they're not focused on outcomes as much as the other guys, but it is something where you can see some significant value. If you were to compare, for example, Teva against some of its competitors and their kind of growth and what's driving the growth and the profitability, what you see is a lot of the large pharma's revenue growth is because of pricing hikes, right? As opposed to these guys actually have profit growth, right? And they're able to really kind of drive some of that through. But it's not just Teva, it's others as well. For the around the patient innovators, what we see them, again, if you think of this, like how do I have a service and I want to be able to wrap services around my drug and make that effective and help kind of build a better engagement model with patients, they're really kind of focusing on the shift of what's happening and how patients engage with the healthcare system. And so there's a lot around the ability to use digital channels and to get access information that way, where you get folks that will go on, for example, like a WebMD or do a Google search, and that's how they start their journey, right? I don't feel well or something's off, let me just go online and check something out. And, the sooner you can kind of get into that journey and intersect with that patient, the more you can drive the services and the value that you can deliver to that patient. So this is something, when you think about how this breaks down over age groups and stuff, certainly younger folks are more digitally enabled, but we do see this kind of trend shifting over time, so even the older generations are also more digitally enabled than they used to be. Now, the physician certainly plays a key role, but the advantage is how do I kind of intersect and understand the patient. So we had one company who has a novel diabetes drug with a complicated injection technique. And it's not super complicated, but what they realized is, hey, YouTube is the #2 search engine in the world. I don't know if you guys knew that. And so what they found was that patients were going online and looking up YouTube on like how to inject themselves, and they had other patients telling them what to do, right? And they're like, we need to control that voice. We need to get into that channel, and we need to provide like educational material, if you will, on helping the patient answer the questions they have when they're not going to go to the physician. They're going to go try to get the information on their own. Just one small example of, it's not a service in the larger construct, but it is a service in the sense of giving patient information they need when they need it to help them have a better experience and have better outcomes. And then when you think about how we want to focus on value innovators, this is just looking at a heart failure example. This is a very public case, Boston Scientific and also JP Morgan, our partnership with them, and how we run a platform that brings together a number of health systems with Boston Scientific to share real-time data, and then Qualcomm does some remote monitoring, patient tracking, and then we run all the analytics off of that to move the population to kind of better outcomes and close those care gaps and things like that. So what we find is like the increasing costs, frequent readmissions, like some of these trends, but just by having this idea of, okay, how do I be a value innovator? I want to move to an outcomes-based model. You can't just do it overnight. You need to gather information. And as you're doing that, you want to kind of close these care gaps and think about what are kind of the real kind of levers to move care and get to those different outcomes. And so certainly cost is a big driver to motivate people to participate in the program, and for Boston Scientific to get involved as well, but payers are engaged and everyone's really excited about it. Now, you have to reduce readmissions, and we were able to actually reduce 24% of the 30-day readmissions in a very short amount of time. And it actually has gone up since then, but at the time this was in the first 4 months. Right? So just trying to move that forward has been very effective. And there's kind of compliance issues and trying to understand and work through kind of how do you share the information, how do you give that visibility back, how do you help work with the healthcare systems, understand everyone's doing things in a slightly different way. How can I help standardize some of that and to enable patients to experience like the best care, whatever that may be, for themselves. And regulatory requirements, there's definitely a big challenge for value innovators around the data quality and where you're getting the information from. So we talked a little bit about patient trackers and what those mean. Is the data really accurate, or even patient-reported data? How accurate is that going to be? Those are challenges that you have to overcome and figure and navigate a way through that. As is just the ability to kind of confederate, your EMR data if you're bringing something to the market with a clinical trial data. Those are data issues that you're going to have to overcome. And they're not easy challenges to overcome, but we are seeing people make significant progress along the spectrum. And then the market is evolving and understanding what reimbursements mean. So this is an example where, in this case, they're just kind of monitoring and gathering data and trying to help collaborate and create that paradigm of sharing and best practices and moving care at a population level. But down the road, you could foresee an example where you say, well, I'm going to cover the readmissions, right? So I'm going to have one price for care, and that care will last a certain period of time, and if the person gets readmitted, then the company will pay for that, right? It's part of the coverage of the cost. So a payer is just paying one price, and regardless of what happens with the readmissions, the payer is not incurring additional costs. So see the market evolving in that way, and then prioritization. It's trying to understand and focus on like which patients are actually driving the variability in outcomes, and how is it that some patients are going to be more predisposed, if you will, to, in this case, a readmission, or in some case, a less than ideal outcome, and how can you focus how you interact with that population so that you have the best impact on the population that's going to drive your variability, and understanding and appreciating everyone's different and what that means and what's going to be the characteristics that kind of influence that equation are going to be different. But it is something that just requires a very intimate knowledge of not only your patients but also the providers that they're going to see in the environment that they're in. And then what we did in this case, in a view of how to think about how to solve for that, is create this kind of construct. It's a pretty complicated slide in the sense of there's just a lot of stuff going on, but you want to create this input on what we put on the top, this digital physician and patient engagement, right? So it's not a digital physician, but a physician and patient engagement that's digital. So that there is this interaction that the physician and the patient can have as a collaboration, right? And understanding how that works when they're in the hospital, which is the inpatient side on the left, and how that works when they're out of the hospital, which is the remote side on the right. So you have some patient management, you have some discharge optimizations, how to move them from inpatient to out, and how to keep them out once they're out. So you might have some intervening episodes that how do you move them in a way that doesn't get them back into the hospital. And then care delivery optimization once they're in the hospital, right? To ensure that the care team is working effectively and those care gaps are being closed. So coordinating all of that and wrapping that around the patient is what's on the bottom piece of that, is building in kind of how to share data, having the data integration work in a seamless way that intersects with that kind of digital engagement up top, and actually being able to be smart about how you do the analytics in a way that can be a little bit predictive and drive some of the, we hear, AI and machine learning and all that stuff, but if you can do that in a very effective way that can be informative to help move the needles on these pieces, you can actually drive significant outcome improvement at a population level. So thinking holistically about how you can do that and how you share. So if you're a med device company or a pharma company or even a professional services firm trying to operate and navigate in the space, you see that, again, no one company does everything, right? And it's actually working together that will drive and move the needle the best. So again, kind of emphasizing to get to you improved outcomes is that gray area there, the clinical coordination services. It's again, how do you work together? When the patient's not in the hospital is still an active participant in their care in a meaningful way so that they don't come back to the hospital, right? And when the hospital is acting, in particular when they're in the hospital, they're doing it in a way that's trying to, get them to the best site, for care as possible, whether it's staying in the hospital to, do more tests and, be more careful about what they need to do, or it's trying to move them, whether it's home or to an offsite or a SNF or something, to get better care in a more kind of intimate way that, can be more tailored to them. So again, trying to think about the particular patient. But it's about the value and thinking through how do I move the needle. If I'm focusing on outcomes, I want to be able to drive care at a large level. The last piece here, and then I'll get into some other quick things around talent and how to kind of build for the future. But this is the digital's gone healthcare and the healthcare gone digital. What this is meant to show is just how companies are kind of coming together and dissecting and intersecting with the patient. And you see companies that are moving into space, certainly some popular ones with, Alphabet and Samsung is doing something with their Biohealth and what they're trying to do with the S-Health app, and there's a lot going on in that space. Amazon Web Services is actually just driving a lot in terms of their cloud infrastructure and Amazon Labs and what they can do to help kind of move the needle. And certainly from a supply chain perspective, they're actually providing a lot of products and interesting novel approaches that they're exploring. Qualcomm, I mentioned before, is going to be involved. And then on the other side, you've got GE, Philips, and to a certain extent through acquisitions, the way IBM is playing, kind of being more healthcare, and then on the back end, leveraging the IBM play to be the technical marriage of the two, is really kind of moving and intersecting the patient in multiple ways, and how life sciences companies kind of intersect too, which you can see this convergence happening in the industry, where the patient is going to get bombarded with different solutions and different approaches and different techniques, and they're all trying to navigate, because they all have access to information too, what that means for them. So what we want to do just real quick is talk to a certain extent of some aspects around digital gone healthcare. One key thing to think about is like the Apple Watch. If you think about the Apple Watch and what it can do, if it gets its approvals, is that it actually can be a medical device and has some biomonitoring capabilities that are far advanced than what a company like Siemens could even provide a couple of years ago, right? So the quality of the data collection and the quality of the tracking mechanisms is significantly improving, and it's going to continue to improve and evolve over time. And then you have like interesting, the glucose dispensing contact lens is questionable on its efficacy and ability to work right now. An interesting construct, right? And they're trying, right? And the fact is that with the capital that they have, they can put a lot of shots on goal, right? And if one works, then it could be completely innovative and disruptive. So being aware of what's happening is going to be critical. An example of that is what Google did with their DeepMind program in the UK. Get early stages. We'll see how it goes. These are all launching soon. But they have the Heart app and then the Streams app. And what they're trying to do with the Heart app, it's about clinical coordination, right? How do I prioritize what I have to do to treat my patients, right? And then close the care gaps, make sure patients are seen right away or as quickly as they can be, and help to kind of order and prioritize and share from a clinical provider perspective who's going to do what and how can we work together to drive and improve patient care. And it's a pretty good results. It's still very early in what it's trying to do, but it was an acquisition they made and they proved on, and that's just launched. And then you have the Streams app, which they're working with the NIH to think about ways to kind of interact with the nurse, right? And how can the nurse get information about a very particular patient? It's almost like how do I check on a patient while I'm kind of running around and get like real-time information and be able to kind of drive care. Again, some interesting novel ways that they're trying to influence healthcare from a provider side and what that means to kind of close that clinical coordination, being a partner in that ecosystem. So again, part of that collaboration theme. So what this means is that these new operating models require new capabilities to pull it off, right? So we talked a little bit about how do you go from like this digital kind of construct to a value partnership and get into like this improved outcomes. This is my heroic hooray from the bottom. That's improve patient outcomes, but also deliver value at the same time. And you can do both simultaneously. But it does require this collaboration. So understanding like how to scale quickly, how to drive information, at the level you need to make those kind of informed, detailed decisions, how to partner with providers to close care gaps, how to work with payers to think about paying. We even see, large employers like a Boeing and a Walmart, like skipping payers altogether and directly contracting with provider healthcare systems, right? And so understand, like, how do I partner with a large employer? What does that mean? So there's all kinds of ways to do that. And in the example where I mentioned the Boston Scientific and the Qualcomm and the Accenture and how that's all coming together to kind of move that clinical coordination is another thing. Like there's no one entity that could do as much on its own, but it's really the sum of the parts. And so when you think about what that means for an organization, it's that you need different talent than you used to, right? And a good example is like, if you're a drug company and you're trying to honestly take a fresh look at yourself and you say, hey, my R&D hasn't been super productive, I got a couple assets, but it's very expensive, it takes a long time, and these technologies are coming out, or interesting software that's actually improving clinical care and clinical outcomes. Maybe I should also build a technology platform, right? Maybe I should get into that game. And if I want to improve patient lives, why am I just focused on drugs, right? And companies can consider that, right? Or you could go, if I want to improve patient lives and I want to move to outcomes, why am I just a drug company? Why don't I partner with a payer and like manage a population with them and think about like a different way to kind of drive that value? And those conversations are happening, but to pull those off requires a completely different skill set. And so understanding you have to deliver value. If you get that over the hurdle, then you understand, like, you certainly need the clinical experience. You need kind of strategic thinking, some innovative problem solving. You need to think about what the market is moving. So if I'm developing an asset today, I can't develop it in the model that is the framework that exists today, because it's going to take a few years, and the framework's going to be different, right? So how do I be nimble and dynamic and, not be too conservative that I go too slow, but not be too aggressive that I, totally screw the pooch and end up with an asset I can't get approved. So the driver of a lot of that is real-world data analytics, right? So how do you have the people, the infrastructure, and the capabilities to not only just do the analytics, but actually derive insights out of those analytics? So you think about like a lot of the quantitative folks and the data scientists. You're competing with Google and Apple and all these companies that are like getting programmers and data scientists to drive their delivery, right? So it's not, I just need the basic scientists to discover a novel drug. I actually need to build a platform, and I need to participate in an ecosystem that leverages these skills. So focusing and referencing how you're going to do that. Again, you don't have to do it all alone, but how are you going to do that in your organization? And then we get into this idea of moving at digital speed or being what quote-unquote disruptive, perhaps the most overused term in the last 5 years. But when you move that going forward, what does that mean? It means being nimble, being flexible, like competitors are coming fast, right? And what it means to regulations are changing. There's certainly a lot of pressure across like different regions in terms of driving out costs and what that means, what is value, what are outcomes, how do I compete with big pharma, how do I compete with med device, how do I compete with tech companies. It's a competitive and complex landscape, and be able to kind of adapt and be flexible and be nimble and continue to iterate and reiterate is going to be what you need to be successful. So, understanding not only your health economics and the impact of that, but like how are the different kind of innovations impacting the ecosystem? So again, it's not just what you drive, but how can I drive better? If my drug is paired with this device, or if my device is paired with this drug, or if my device is put into a care paradigm that looks like this, like that, maybe that can drive your outcome. But understanding what that means and what the equation looks like is going to be a big part of getting reimbursement going forward. And then the patient perspective, again, patient-centric doesn't just mean I say it and I really care about the patient, but it actually just means like, how do I move the needle for them? And how do I think of them not just about patients, but as consumers, right? And a good example is, we were helping a company with ADD therapy, and one of the things that we ended up coming out is like a lot of people don't have a clear diagnosis. A lot of people are just frustrated, particularly parents who have children with ADD. They just feel stressed out and they're confused about what they should do. And so it's like, well, you could deliver the drug to the child, and that's not just children either with ADD, but if you can actually create some type of network and coaching services and help families deal with ADD and think of the families that way, like those are real problems that they're trying to solve, real stresses in their lives, right? And the number of appointments that you need, how many days you gotta take off from work to go get to neuro exams and monitor the meds and say, one med doesn't work, you put them on another one, you put them on another one. It's like, well, how do I actually help that consumer and the caregiver and the patient like navigate that journey more effectively? Agnostic of my drug, how do I do that? And then you think about like, how does diagnostics work, right? And so we created like an online diagnostic that would enable people to, just test online. Like, what's the likelihood that you have it? No, you can't. Like, you have it, but it's like you should see a physician here, bring these results. And what we ended up having is a lot of people took it and came out that they don't have ADD, right? So they came off therapy and like, oh no, that's like a horrible thing in the sense of like the pharmaceutical company's revenue stream. But it's a good thing in terms of moving the patients. And the construct was, a lot of people took the test who didn't know they had it and came out having it, right? And so it all worked out in the end, and you got the right people who you could actually help and benefit in a meaningful way. And you have this halo effect around the services that are actually moving the care, because you're thinking about the patient and the families and what they're going through and how to move them through a journey that's really difficult and stressful, and it's not just about the drug. And then to do that, effectively is this collaboration piece. Again, I'm just going to keep emphasizing it, right? So we talk a lot about external collaborations. The thing I want to emphasize here is the internal collaborations too, right? The biggest failure of any strategy is the lack of cross-functional collaboration, right? So how are you fostering that collaborative culture in your own organization? How are you making sure everyone is not just focused on their own agenda, but focused on the larger agenda? And how are you matching, whether it's a performance management system or goals or holding people accountable to particular outcomes? How are you driving that and changing that so you don't get stuck in the same old routines and the way people are used to working? Because without proper guidance and proper structure, they're just going to do it the way they did it before, and that's a path to failure. So this is the last slide, at the end is digital disruption. Again, I got to put this in at least 10 times against requirement, right? This is an overused term, but the role of digital and how it's moving and what its play is in the evolution is very critical and very important to the success going forward, right? It's being a part of that, understanding that, building off of that is going to be key. And how you can do that is understanding the service integrations and the solutions. So, again, switching from a products-focused view to a services-founded view is going to be the cleanest path to kind of move this evolution faster. Understanding and getting to value contracts and what does that mean and negotiating those effectively, it's not an easy task, and people are really struggling with that. But solving that and moving that and focusing on how to do that, working with payers and health authorities effectively for that, is going to be a key part of the success moving forward. And then again, trying to focus on lower acuity settings and moving people out of the hospitals, like how you can help navigate and enable that to happen. It's a big cost driving our cost, but there's some significant benefit to that for the patient as well. Understanding the changing roles and understanding the new balance that you have. So you have to kind of balance the providing care, providing services, quality of care versus cost and effectiveness of care. And truly understanding the ecosystem and how other people can enhance or detract from your value and be defensive or competitive on what that means. So that's the end of the slideshow. I do have